What happens when your perfect target gets pulled off the market because he's too valuable to his current team's culture? When do you pivot from your dream acquisition to the realistic alternatives, even if they come with significant risks? Welcome back, folks. It's Friday, January 16th, 2026, and we got some tough news for Montreal Canadiens fans who've been dreaming about Blake Coleman in the Blue Blanc Rouge. According to a report from Christopher Moore, citing TSN insider Darren Dreger, the player Kent Hughes has been targeting for weeks might not be available after all. And the reason? It's not about price. It's not about injury. It's about something you can't put a number on: leadership and culture. Dreger's assessment is brutal for Montreal's hopes. I know teams are calling Conroy and asking about Coleman, but you can't trade everyone. You have to have a backbone on the cultural side of your team, and Coleman is definitely that. Essentially, the Calgary Flames have accepted that they're sellers, but they've decided that Coleman is a father figure who needs to stay home and take care of the kids, the prospects who are going to be the future of the franchise. Dreger's conclusion? It's unlikely he'll be traded. Let that sink in for a second. After weeks of reports, after all the analysis about how perfectly Coleman fits what Montreal needs, after watching him throw 105 hits and score 13 goals, after building the entire narrative around adding him to transform the Canadiens into a physical, playoff-ready team, he's probably not available. That's the harsh reality of the trade market. Sometimes the player you want most is the player another team can't afford to lose. Not because of his on-ice production, but because of what he means to the locker room. So where does that leave Kent Hughes? Well, according to a report, if the Coleman door has closed, the Nazem Kadri window has blown wide open. Dreger suggested that instead of moving Coleman, the Flames are much more willing to trade Rasmus, Andersson, and Nazem Kadri. For Montreal, Kadri remains an interesting target. The team has been searching for a top six center throughout this entire campaign. He brings the production, the edge, the playoff experience, and the mentorship that the young core needs. But here's the massive caveat: the contract. Kadri is 34 years old and signed to the summer of 2029. That means Kent Hughes will be committing to Kadri until he's nearly 38 years old. That's not a bridge contract to help the young guys develop. That's a long-term marriage to a player who's already on the wrong side of 35. Compare that to Coleman's situation. Coleman had one more year after the season. That's manageable. That's a commitment you can live with even if it doesn't work out perfectly. But Kadri through 2029, that's a completely different level of risk. Yes, Kadri is producing 32 points in 42 games. Yes, he brings everything Montreal needs in terms of style and attitude. But is Hughes willing to pay a substantial return in assets and then commit nearly $7 million per year for the next 3.5 seasons to a player who will be approaching 40 by the time the contract expires? That's the question he has to answer. And it's a much tougher question than the Coleman decision would have been. Now here's where the report brings up a fascinating point that should make every Habs fan reconsider what this team actually needs. Montreal currently has the 5th best goals per game average in the entire NHL at 3.34. Read that again. 5th best in the league. We've been talking for weeks about adding offense, about finding goal scorers, about bringing in players who can put the puck in the net. But the numbers say Montreal is already doing that at an elite level. The real problem? Defense. Only 10 teams in the NHL have allowed more goals per game than Montreal in 2025-26. That's where the issue is. The Canadiens are winning games 4-3 when they should be winning them 3-1. And that brings us to Rasmus Andersson. He's a right-handed defenseman, which is exactly what Montreal needs. He's in the last year of his contract, making him a pure rental with no long-term commitment. And according to reports, it's looking increasingly unlikely that he'll re-sign with Calgary, which means the Flames are motivated to move him before they lose him for nothing in free agency. If Coleman is off the table, maybe that's a sign from the hockey gods that Hughes should pivot to defense instead of continuing to chase forwards. Adding Andersson would immediately upgrade Montreal's blue line, give them a legitimate top-four right-handed defenseman, and address the actual problem that's costing them games. Think about it this way. If you're scoring 3.34 goals per game, you don't need to score more. You need to stop giving up so many goals against. Andersson helps with that. Coleman doesn't. But here's the complication. Andersson is a rental. He's gone in the summer unless Montreal can convince him to re-sign. So you'd be giving up assets for a few months of his services, betting that he can help you make a deep playoff run, and then hoping you can convince him to stay long-term. That's a different kind of gamble than acquiring Kadri, who comes with term, but also comes with the risk of that term becoming an albatross. So Kent Hughes is faced with a choice. Does he go after Kadri, the veteran center with the big contract and the long-term commitment? Does he pivot to Andersson, the rental defenseman who addresses a team's actual statistical weakness? Or does he wait, be patient, and see if other options emerge as we get closer to the March 6th trade deadline? The report mentions that Montreal might have to be patient and wait until after the Olympic break, with the games in Italy creating a freeze in the schedule and the trade deadline still weeks away. This saga could drag on for a while. But one thing is certain, Plan Coleman is dead. The dream target, the perfect fit, the player who checked every box. He's staying in Calgary because he's too important to their culture to move. Now it's time for Plan B with Kadri, or Plan C with Andersson, or maybe even Plan D with a player we haven't discussed yet. The market has shifted. The priorities might need to shift too. If I'm Kent Hughes, I'm seriously considering the Andersson option. Yes, he's a rental. Yes, you might lose him in the summer, but he addresses the actual problem, goals against, and he doesn't require a multi-year commitment to a player in his mid-30s. Kadri is tempting because of what he brings in terms of attitude and experience. But that contract is scary. 34 years old, signed through 2029, nearly $7 million per year. That's the kind of deal that can haunt you if it goes wrong. The Coleman dream is over. Time to adjust, adapt, and find the next best option. That's what good general managers do. They don't panic when Plan A falls through. They move to Plan B with the same discipline and strategic thinking that got them to this position in the first place. What do you think, folks? Should Montreal pivot to Nazem Kadri despite the long-term contract risk? Should they focus on Rasmus Andersson and address the defensive issues that are actually costing them games? Or should they wait patiently for another option to emerge? How disappointed are you that Blake Coleman is likely staying in Calgary? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to hit that like button, because the trade deadline just got a lot more complicated. And we're going to be tracking every development as Kent Hughes adjusts his strategy on the fly.